Welcome back to another episode of I'm Really Into That Stuff. This is the podcast that features me, Jana Stern, psychic activator, energy healer, and astrologer, as I delve into deep conversations with different folks in the holistic and conscious industries about the many beliefs and practices of spirituality, mental health, and what it means to be a human who's into that stuff in the 2020s and beyond. I'm Really Into That Stuff is excited to tell you that we have won one of the top 10 Esoterica podcast spots on feedspot.com. Check out the whole list at blog.feedspot.com/esoterica_podcasts for the whole list. Thanks to our friends at FeedSpot for this incredible honor. Welcome back to another episode of I'm Really Into That Stuff. I am your host, Jana Stern. I am super stoked to be having this conversation. Alex Terranova is joining us today. You are a recovering asshole, which is fantastic to say out loud. You're a leader of retreats. You're a coach. You are the founder of the Alchemy of Love. You lead fire circles, and you are a dog dad. I would love for you to introduce yourself and tell my audience, my listeners, how you got into all that stuff.
I love that you said the leader of the Alchemy of Love. I'm not the leader of Alchemy of Men, but I love that it's perfect. I love that. That's how I'm recovering.
Is there a difference though, right?
In a way, no, right? That's why I love it. It's like we're returning to that. I mean, I think that most of the people I work with, or most of the men on the retreats, it's like that's what they're coming back to, right? Loving themselves. Right. I want to have the experience of life where I get to experience as much as I can, right? Mm-hmm. There's things I don't want to do. But when you were talking about like who I am and what I do, it's kind of like I want life to be a full buffet, and I want to try all the things. And the thing about life is the buffet is endless, right? It goes on to infinity. Mm-hmm. And so I want to be able to come back to the things I like. And I want to be able to explore the things that I've never had. And I think that's how I've actually gotten here. Was I used to live a really small life. I used to actually open restaurants and bars for a living and be super judgmental and opinionated and an asshole. And one day I woke up and was like, well, this isn't cute. And it's not going to be cute as I get older. And this isn't fun. And I'm miserable. And I kind of just opened the doors, mind, body, spirit, like all things. And just started exploring, and now we're here.
How did you get on this journey in the beginning? What was the aha that made you really realize like, oh, not cute?
So two things is really how we got here. One is I was living in LA. I got a job offer in New York City. And at the time, I was again opening and running restaurants and bars. And I think there was some piece of me that, I was drinking too much. I was spending a lot of time chasing women from the sake of like, it made me feel good about myself. I had a car I couldn't afford, right? I was living a very ego surface level life. And I think I really went to New York because I was like, if I leave, things will be better there, right?
Mm-hmm. And my problems won't follow me.
Yeah.
They'll just stay there.
Yeah, no, you just take them right with you in a knapsack ready to unpack when you get there. And I created the same life when I got to New York, right? I started creating the exact same life, but actually was more miserable because I didn't have the community to support me in that pool of whatever I was living. And within that first year or two, it got darker for me, and not in ways that were dangerous, but more of the drinking and just more of the aloneness and more of the distractions. And I found myself in a relationship with somebody who was great, but I could she would say to me, like, you're so unhappy. And I think no one had ever said that before. And then I went to Costa Rica with my family, and my cousin, who's been doing shaman and spiritual work with women, she's in her mid to late 30s now, but she's been doing it since she was like 12 years old.
Wow.
Was having a spiritual moment, families are. And she stepped away from the table and she went outside to kind of ground herself and pray and center herself. And when she came back, she asked us all to talk about what we were grateful for. This is people do this all the time, but I didn't do things like this. And when the asshole, when you would ask me what I was grateful for, I would complain, I would make jokes, I would deflect. And for some reason, for this very first time, it hit me like a ton of bricks. And I feel like God punched me in the face and I burst into tears. I wasn't able to answer the question. I was sobbing, and everyone in my family was looking at me like, who is this and what just happened? And I didn't know what was happening, right? It was just something broke, the dam burst, and all of this, to be an asshole, you have to suppress a lot of feelings.
Yes.
Or project them onto everyone else, right?
Yes.
And it was like all of that suddenly came out. And in that moment, what I then realized through the next few moments of that interaction was I had everything that most people on this planet would want. I had 2 parents that were sitting there that are loving and supportive. I had an aunt, an uncle, cousins, family that was like all, we have our stuff, but we like love each other and get along, and nobody's hurting each other, abusing each other, right? We're able to take a family vacation to Costa Rica, which means we have some sort of, stability. Yeah. Everybody's healthy to relative degrees, right? And I had a job and all these things. And I just realized, wow, I'm like so ungrateful and so not appreciative of all the privileges that I have. And I don't appreciate any of it. And what a jerk. Like what? And this just kind of like, right, flat, it just hit me. And from that moment, I said to my girlfriend at the time, when we go back to New York, like everything's going to be different. And she was like, what does that mean? And I was like, I don't know. And that's when I went back to New York, everything was. I stopped watching TV. I stopped watching sports. I canceled my cable, my net, like all the things. I started reading books. I stopped going to the gym as much, started going to yoga. I'd never really done yoga. I mean, and it was layered, right? It wasn't all instantaneous, but
yeah. It takes time.
I just started doing the opposite. Whatever I was doing, I was like, no more of that. And I had never heard of coaching. I'd heard of like Tony Robbins.
Sure.
But I didn't know. I had not heard of coaching, personal development, religion, spirituality was like a full stop. So it started with a lot of like turning off the distractions and kind of, and exploring through books and things like that. And then it just kind of, the dam broke.
Yeah, that's wild. That Costa Rican jungle, that's my like home away from home. My heart lives there. I just happen to be in this place right now. It's the best. And that regeneration of the jungle, it really does. It shakes something up in you. And every time I'm there, something in me shifts in such a way that I'm like, oh, I'm not. And that happens when we travel, but I feel Costa Rica has something magical about it for sure. I'd love for you to talk to me a little bit about how unbecoming an asshole shifted your relationship to yourself first and foremost. Like, what did you notice as you stopped being an asshole?
Well, I want to say too, right? I say it's a joke, but it's true. It's like the recovering is, I think it actually doesn't end.
Sure. Yeah. The healing never stops.
To a degree, we're always addicted to something.
Yes.
Right. And there's a part of me that's addicted to judgment, to not, right. I'm judging myself so much to deflect. I judge others. There's a part of me that the part that doesn't love myself has me project that out onto others. And so even now, this is all that happened in 2015. So we're almost, 10 years later. There's still moments where my wife will be like, you're not being very nice. Now I can correct very quickly now, right? Now my compass is like, oh, we're not sailing in the direction that we're committed to being as a human. How do we get back to our due north? And I can apologize and clean up my messes and whatnot. But there still is that part of my ego, or that old, I think of it as like my shadowy self, that like it does need to come out and play sometimes. And if I don't give it a place to play responsibly, then it will come out sideways.
I think that work is imperative in a world full of patriarchal constraints. I think understanding how we all can be assholes, but particularly men. When you guys are assholes, it's far more domineering and scary for us as women to be in your presence. And I think that the consciousness revolution that's happening right now requires all people, but men in particular, to really do this work. So, I appreciate it a lot that you're doing this. Tell me a little bit about, what the Alchemy of Men, the Alchemy of Love is really all about for you, and kind of its seeds and how it grew.
Yeah, I can connect it to what he just asked, because I think I want to say the thing that I didn't get to say, which is I got to like myself more. And I think when that thing you just said about dominating, I don't know any people that are dominating that are happy. was just talking to someone the other day. There's, without saying names, but there's a lot of very wealthy, powerful people that we see constantly in the media, like specifically men, that are very powerful. They're very like successful, conquering in the capitalistic world. They never occur as happy.
Never.
And my thing is like, man, if you gave me the wealth of I would just be like playing and having fun. And it doesn't mean that I couldn't still like be doing something or up to something. But as I often say to men that come on our retreats or that I work with, and this applies to very A-type and like women who have adapted to this society,
sure,
is like, hey, if you have the success in business, or you make all the money you want, or you get the house, or you get the partner, and you're not happy, what the hell was the point of it? Right? Or I thought the point was so you could like actually enjoy your life, and we're getting the things we want and we're not enjoying our life. And I think, so to come back to Alchemy of Men, the Alchemy of Men, this came because I started to question like my own relationship to men. And started to like, who do I want to be when I become a dad? And I started to look at my relationship with my dad and my relationship with my brother. And I started to realize how many narratives and stories are like layered through that. Has me show up like, why do I act one way at the gym when I interact with a man versus if like a woman's walking past me?
Sure.
And started to realize like all the program, like we're like robots, right? It's like there's a thing in our head controlling us. And I think with men specifically, we're so conditioned to live like in, a tiny little box of what's acceptable to be a man.
Yes.
And I felt that this got opened up for me, like, let's say 2 or 3 years ago. I'd done all this work and I'm still noticing these constraints. Like, oh, as a man, I need to like show up like this. I need to act like this. I need to behave like this. And what I started to realize was everybody was losing. The people I interacted with were losing. They're missing. They don't get my heart. They don't get my softness. They don't get my like community, my teamwork. And I'm actually also missing out on the experience of life because I'm only getting to live inside of a tiny little range. And when I started to look at what was available in the world for men's work, I saw what I thought was two distinct things. And I'm super clear there's more. Now I've realized there are more options. But the thing I saw about 2 or 3 years ago was very like a response or a rejection to feminism. So it was like we need to be super masculine and go hardcore and kind of go the like, bring back the ways. It's not even the ways of old, but it's like the ways of the last like 100 years and be powerful through dominance and control. And masculinity looks one specific way, which is like toughness and bravado, and leadership is we're in charge. And I would see these retreats where men would be like fighting each other, and it was all about like conquering fear and not being afraid. And I kind of was like, I mean, that seems like a little extreme. Like, if you and I are preparing for battle, we should go to that retreat. But that's not how I want to live my life. And I think men specifically have enough pressure and stress. They don't need to be preparing for battle. Most of us, especially in those of us that have iPhones.
Right.
And then I saw the other side, which was kind of like men cuddling. And my joke is that I actually saw a photo of men crying in a puddle of mud together. And I was like, well, I go to therapy. I have a coach. Like, I'm not afraid to talk about my emotions and feel. Yeah. And I'm still growing in that area, but I'm not, that seems like a little extreme the other way. Like, we just need to soften men. And I went, what about the whole space in the middle, or the ability to like swing from side to side, depending on the circumstances of life. And that's what I didn't see. And I got one of my best friend's wives and my wife were sitting there as I was complaining about what I was seeing. And they said, well, if you don't like what you see in the world, you get to be the person to create something that you would like. And so I started to design, which I didn't know what I was doing, this Alchemy of Men. And through the help of ayahuasca and the help of reading a lot of books on people that have been doing work like this before me, we started to create a model that was, no one should tell a man who he should be as a man except that man. That man needs to decide and this applies to women. No one should tell a woman who she should be as a woman, except that woman. But as humans, we need to decide who we want to be to create the lives that we want to create. So, I think about it as imagining myself as a 70-year-old man. And who do I want to be? Who do I want that man to be? And I have to start becoming that man today and walking that journey today so I can end up as that person.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so important. And I feel like as you're saying it, I'm inclined to say, look back to 7-year-old you and check in with him, because he probably knows who 70-year-old you wants to be, right? He's enjoying life and feeling playful. I mean, there's an evolution and a consciousness that evolves in that time, God willing. But yeah, I love what you're sharing. And I think that lately I've been thinking a lot about the future of humanity, because it's really been feeling like we're on the precipice of something new, because clearly something is ending. And as we think about this, as I've been really thinking about it, my partner and I have a lot of conversations about men and women, and how much pressure there is on men and how hard it is to be one, and also how difficult it is to be a woman, and how hard it is to be in partnership with one another. And, I reference this a lot. There's this South Park episode that they go to Mars. And on Mars, I don't know if you've seen it. I don't know if you're a South Park fan, but on Mars, Cartman gets there and he kind of notices everything's a little different, a little strange. And he's like, where are all the men? And he realizes they take him into this like underground cave, and all the men are naked, standing at computers, typing, being like hooked up to something, clearly being like milked. And the joke is that the men are being farmed for their jokes and their semen. And that's sort of like all that they're going to be good for in the future. And I don't think that that's the future that I want, right? I want a future where men feel loving and supportive and kind, but also strong and brave and protective and empathetic and, all those things. And so, yeah, what you're talking about, that pendulum swinging and like the gap between the two and the infinite gray, you talk about the yin yang, that middle spot there that when you zoom in is sort of infinitely gray. This is my zoom because we're in 2024 now. And when you zoom in, it is infinitely gray, and there's so much space in there. But because in that old paradigm, in the old world, it's been like it's black or it's white. It's really important for us as individuals to figure out where on all of the spectrums do I fall? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think we not only get to choose, but we get to continuously reinvent.
Yeah.
Right? Like we're the only constant is evolution, right? Is the whatever you believe, like the world is constantly changing and evolving. And so that doesn't mean we have to throw out everything from the day before. That's not right. And it takes time. But if we however we identify, like are staying still, and this is what it is, like, oh, this is what it's been, so this is what it is, we're actually operating in an oppositional force to nature and the world. I had this experience recently where I was like deep in a meditative experience, and this thing hit me that was, it felt like I was interacting with God, and it was like, I'm going to keep making human beings differently until I realize that there is no one way to be a human. Mm-hmm. And I got this glimpse of the animal kingdom and how like we could just use something simple as like dogs, right? Okay. Dogs, there's a from a sexual perspective, there's a male and a female.
Yep.
But from a species perspective, there's so many different kinds, right? And why is it as humans, and that applies to everything. If we go to the plant world,
oh yeah,
we look at like any type of plant, there's so many variations on even one type of plant. So everything on this planet has various variations, but yet as humans, we think we only have like two.
Right.
It just doesn't make sense. Now maybe that's like how it starts, but this thought was like, oh my God, we think right now we live some people feel like it's a very confusing, like how are people identifying? People are saying they identify one way. It feels like different days we have new ways of identifying.
Sure.
Which we're weird about it right now because it feels newer and it's uncomfortable.
We're just still finding the language.
Totally. Yeah. And some of us are having more experiences of it than others, right? Some communities, people living there having very little to this.
Yes.
I had this moment of deep, like knowing that, man, in 1,000 years or however, this is not going to happen next year, that there's going to be hundreds, and it won't, you won't be able to like check a box of what are you? There'll be many boxes to identify.
In fact, there will not even be boxes, period. The dimension will transcend from 3 to 5, and it won't matter which boxes you tick, right?
Yeah. But it'll just be, we'll come in all different everything. Yeah.
Variations.
It won't just be, shape, sizes, gender. It'll be so many variations. And kind of, if you think about it, like animals and plants, like how cool is that? We don't all want the same dog. We don't all want the same plants in our house. Why do we want our humans to be so simplified? And I get why we do it makes it easier to understand. Totally.
Yeah.
But to your point, as we expand our wisdom, our consciousness, our awareness, don't we want, right? Like how much would it suck to go to a zoo and there were 2 things to look at?
Right? Exactly. I'm so with you. I think the way that our species is evolving right now is so limitless in so many different directions that it is a little ridiculous that we're still trying to corral things. And whether or not you believe one thing or another about gender, the reality is that every single person is expressing their gender differently. Even if you have 5 dudes who are super macho or 4 women who are super femme, they're all going to express that very, very differently. And so really what we're doing is trying to bring language to the variations of humanity. I think it's so important. And I love that you're giving space to men to not only figure out what that looks like in themselves, but to really also sit with one another as other people figure it out. To just be like, oh, it's not just me who like has, confrontation with my dad, or doesn't know how to go deeper with a man, or needs a woman or my mother to do the work, when really what I need to do is do the work with myself or with my brother or my cousin or my buddy, because that's how the real work gets uncovered. It's like, right?
Yeah. My favorite thing about what we've done could not have been planned. It happened.
Sure.
Was that we've always had, we really strive to have as many different types of men at the retreats as possible.
Cool.
Wealthy, poor, gay, straight, something else that, black, white, Hispanic, like we try, right? We can't control that, but we have a conscious, like, hey, if this is another thing I find problematic about most men's work and most men's retreats. Typically it's white men's work. It's straight white men's work. You got to have a man bun and like, a cool hat and like, hey, it's fine, right? I don't care. You can have all that, right? But if it's only the same type of people, it's like right at a women's circle, it's like all the women look the same and they're all wearing a flowy white dress. Then it's only one type. It's actually only speaks to that type of man. And if the men are similar, then we keep reinforcing the similar structures or boxes that we're in. When we have all these different types of men, we see, first of all, that we're all so much more alike than we think we are different, but we actually do learn from each other's experiences and each other's, the way each other see the world. And which brings me to, at one of our retreats, I think there were about 17 or 18 men, and 3 of them, did not identify as straight. I don't know exactly how they would identify, but they were not. Whereas as far as we knew, the rest of the men identified as straight.
Sure.
Cisgendered straight men, right? And at the retreat, these men created the most magic in their expression of their masculine. It looked very different, and some of them were more comfortable than the others. But by the end of the retreat, their willingness to stand and be bright and express, and they were there for the most part because they were like, our relationship with straight men is limited and blocked, and there's a lot of fear and judgment and whatever. their willingness to kind of get really vulnerable, get uncomfortable, shine their light, freed so many of the straight men to actually become more expressive and more loving and kinder and softer and gentler, and had them all, I would say, become almost stronger together. And I remember this moment, there was a moment where I was like leaning against a wall watching kind of as they were having this experience, like expressing themselves to the group. And I started to cry, and I looked over at Bob, who's my co-founder, and he was sitting on the other side of the room. So we were like at corners, and we were watching these men express themselves and watching how essentially all the straight men were applauding and rooting them on in this moment. And I was in tears because I could not have drawn this up. I could not have made this happen. And yet all I saw in the space was like love and acceptance. And if it was possible in that space, then it's possible in other spaces and in larger spaces.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And that it's the pebble that creates the tsunami, right? Because the little tiny ripple of that is that all those straight men are going to go home and be like, I met the coolest gay dudes. And then be like, that's how camaraderie happens. That's how brotherhood happens. And yeah, I know a lot of gay men who have a really hard time with straight men, particularly men who are like so rigid and masculine. And I'm using air quotes for those who are like listening to the audio. They think that they're being masculine because they're being hard, because they're being tough. But really, you're just kind of being an asshole. And, I think it's so important to do that work for all of the men. And, as I said earlier, like you said, the gay men were shining their light brightest. That is always how it goes. I don't know a single person on any spectrum, that is the autistic spectrum, on the queer spectrum, who is not radiating like an exemplary amount of light. And they've come in with so much love in their body, in their physical vessel, that they can't express it in the standard way. And it always blows my mind to see when people who are very rigid in their thinking really, really experience the light of those people, how much it just like illuminates them,
Yeah. Well, when you're rigid in your thinking, then you're rigid in your feeling, and then you're rigid in your, right? Everything starts as a thought, and then a thought creates a chemical reaction, which creates a feeling. And then a feeling creates how we behave or show up or act. And, that creates our personality. So, right. I think we see it too. And as soon as we start to live and speak our truth, whatever that truth is, right? All of a sudden the rigidity breaks, and we kind of break out of that cage. So there's nothing wrong. Hey, if you really, I think it's important. Like if you really like something a certain way, there's nothing wrong with that. But, I used that buffet metaphor earlier, but if you just keep going to the same spot over and over, and you're unwilling to see that the options are actually endless for infinity, because you're like, but I really like this. Totally fine. But you also will never know if you might have liked something else on that journey, and you might have liked it more, but you're so committed to what you know and what you're comfortable with, you could be missing out, right? Yeah. On so much. Go ahead. Yeah.
I feel like that only happens, you only like what you like because you've experienced something that tells you that it's not safe to like other things.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there. And I also think, though, I learned this through dating, was how much we've been conditioned to like what we like. That I kept dating the same types of women over and over and over, right? It's like same woman, new skin suit, right? Like, and then I even think about, like, when I look back now about when I was younger, about women that I was kind of curious about or like kind of had a crush on, that I didn't go after because they didn't look the way I thought they were supposed to look, or they didn't show up the way I thought they were supposed to look. And it wasn't conscious, right? I wasn't conscious at the time. But so I kept getting not the result I wanted, because I actually was going after what my type was. I often say to people now, like, don't date your type. Your type is just a conditioned set of circumstances that you think you really like. But if it was working for you, you only would have had to found that one time. Like, it actually, and it doesn't mean that it's always that way, but often get outside of what your type is. And I think this applies to anything. And that's where we find the freedom, and that's where we find the things that we really like or that we really want.
Yeah. Share with me a little bit. I know you said that, you lead a lot of fire circles and that you've sat with, ayahuasca. Share with me a little bit about how that practice shows up in your business and also how it shows up in your life.
Yeah. Ayahuasca totally changed my life, and not in the sense of, hey, I don't live in the jungle, right? Like I live in Carlsbad, north of San Diego. Like I still live in regular
civilization.
Yeah. Civilization and operate in civilization. I didn't go get rid of everything I own. But I say it changed my life because so let me actually say that. I was never somebody I was never like somebody who went down like the drug route growing up. Okay. I smoked weed and I drank alcohol. And when I even look back, weed often made me really uncomfortable and paranoid. I don't know why I did it, but alcohol actually was alcohol was a great drug for me. I actually felt like very free. It was not a downer of a drug for me. It had me I felt more expressive and more free. Other psychedelics, other drugs, like I actually was always afraid of. I was always really afraid. And I think part of that is growing up in the 80s and the 90s where they're like, you do something one time, you're going to die.
Right. You're a dare kid.
Yeah. Also, I think that my subconscious was really protecting me.
Yeah.
Because, people talk about I don't really believe in like bad trips, or I think what happens is we're not prepared for what it's going to show us.
Yes.
Or we're not actually in a safe environment to take care, like, set and setting. Like we need to be in a place where we're safe and we're taken care of. And I was always afraid, and I always wanted to try things, but I always would kind of get scared and not do it. Mm-hmm. And so I really I experienced played with mushrooms like in my mid to late 30s for the first time in a very safe, and it was amazing. But it wasn't done I want to say it wasn't done like in ceremony or anything. It was just done in a very safe space in nature. Mm. And then I started hearing about people doing ayahuasca, and without even understanding what it was, I was just like, I want to do that.
Yeah, when the medicine calls, right?
Yeah, I just knew I wanted to do it. And I had heard some people going to a specific place with a specific teacher, and I trusted them, and they were sharing how safe, that was a big thing, like how safe they felt. And so I actually, I said to my wife, I'm going to go do this. And she was like, whoa, okay. And then all of a sudden she was like, I'm going to go do it with you. So we went together the first time. And it was like 10 years of therapy in one night. And we did 3 nights in a row. And what it did though for me, it did for both of us in so many ways, was the way I sort of like describe this is it like cracked open the subconscious mind. And got in there where we don't have access, which I don't even think you can have access to varying degrees with therapy or coaching. It got to those places of our mind that are kind of hidden from us to keep us like sane and operate. And it healed. And when I say healed, I like had moments, and so did my wife, where we went back and had to experience like traumas or things that happened. And it showed us how it happened. It showed us how that produced us, how it evolved in our life. And then we got to like experience it like as if it happened a different way. Or it gave me gratitude or grace for my parents. They're like, hey, they're doing their best.
Sure.
It showed me things about myself that I knew that were true about me, but yet I was like afraid to kind of open up into. And it also, it genuinely felt like I got something like plugged into me, and just things that I'm like, how do I know this now? And like knowing a lot of the men's retreat stuff, I was like, who am I to build this men's retreat? And when I left there, I was like, I know exactly who I am to build that. I know exactly what we're going to do. And I was like, wait, how does that happen? And again, I'm a big advocate for like, don't just go do like ayahuasca or LSD or mushrooms. Like, know where you're going, if anyone ever calls themselves a shaman, I walk the other way.
Me too. I cannot stand it. I don't care if you quote unquote practice shamanism. No, you don't. If you're not given the name by a shaman, you're not a shaman.
Well, also like in every village, there was one shaman. There wasn't like everyone.
So, you mean all of California isn't just shamans?
Yeah, we're all not shamans.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that there's not people that have been trained by shamans that I trust.
Yes.
But all like the people that I work with that do work with me, they don't call themselves that.
Right.
They're guides. They're very humble. They're not doing anything. They're just holding safe space. They're very responsible. They have so much integrity. And now the way that it's impacted my business is there used to be just a kind of point A to B, like do things to get a result. You want more results? Just work harder. Mm-hmm. Kind of a very simplistic. And it's shown me how shifting my energy, shifting my being, shifting how I show up can actually create the same results, if not more, with actually much less effort.
Sure.
And it's taught me how to connect with the unseen. Mm-hmm. I meditate every day. I used to try to meditate, but before plant medicine, it was really hard to sit and be still. Sure. Now I can sit and be still and I'm not a professional, but I meditate every day, and it's something that feels like I'm just like I'm brushing my teeth. Like I wouldn't walk out of the house without brushing my teeth. I don't walk out of the house without meditating. Right. Fire circles, it taught me, how to create like a safe space without knowing where we're going or what we're doing. That there's almost like the river of life is flowing. And can I just make sure the men or the people that are at this fire, we can all flow down this river and we're safe. Nobody falls in, nobody's going to drown, but that there's no right way for it to go. My only job is to let whatever needs to show up or come out and trust that that's right.
Right.
And I've learned that, and I continue to learn from plant medicine. And also I think another big thing would be that the things that we're struggling with are actually like our biggest opportunities. Yes. That if we were in a world, this is hard. I think this is so hard to say without triggering people, but if we were in a world that didn't have the extraordinary problems that we have, what would we be doing? That people starving gives other people an opportunity to open their hearts and help them. If this was actually said, this is a thing I got. I had this moment where I was like, if we don't learn to have our hearts broken every day by the world that we live in, the world will continue to get worse, because we should be brokenhearted every day about what's going on in the world. And all we do is shut our hearts down and distract ourselves so we don't have to see it and be with it, which makes sense, right? There's a lot to be with and a lot to feel. But if we keep shutting our hearts down and stop looking at the horrible things that are happening, that only creates more of the horrible things that are happening, right? Because the trauma creates the trauma creates the trauma. But if we actually all stopped and went, none of this is acceptable, and and our hearts are shattered, then we would all have to do something about it.
Yeah, there's like this deep need. I've been feeling it very intensely. There's a deep, deep need for the collective to feel grief. We've been putting it off. And, I've been saying it a lot. You might say I've been screaming it from the rooftops since 2020. I've been saying it forever, but certainly since we all got locked in our houses and put in isolation chambers and, kept from each other's heart spaces 6 feet away and isolated in ways that are inhumane. And then things have amplified and, people have lost friends and family. And then the world has crumbled into a jillion little pieces, especially as a Jewish woman. It's just been a lot to be alive. And we need to feel the grief of it. It is terrible out there what's happening on all ends, on every corner of this planet. There are people who are hungry, who are dying, who are, being bullied, who are being abused by parents, by loved ones. There are people who we're backwards in our thinking, and we have to really, really, really feel that grief in our body so that we can be like, I don't want to do that anymore. That's how you actually get over grief, is like you let yourself feel how much love is in there to move through it, you know?
You made me think too, we keep, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, there was probably just as much horrible things happening in the world.
Sure.
There's never, Neil deGrasse Tyson also always talks about like, if you got in a time machine and you had to pick a time to be a human being, he's like, it doesn't matter if you're a woman, black. He's like, you'd pick today.
Yep.
Because there's still a lot more possibility and freedoms than used to be. But he's like, but at every point in human history, horrible things were happening.
Yes.
But it's interesting. What you just made me think of is how we keep creating ways to become more aware of all the, right? So we create social media and we say it's for connection, but really, if you look at most social media today,
no one's connected.
A bigger percentage of it is dividing us.
Yes.
Right. And showing us all the problems. It's really using fear and obviously there's good stuff that we can find too.
Sure.
If you look at media, it's the same.
Yep.
But we keep creating new technologies that are making us become more and more. It's their distraction also, but they also make us more and more aware of like all the stuff that's happening. And it's almost the hit I got when I was in this ceremony was you cannot avoid it. Not just me, the collective, that it will keep growing and continuing until you're willing to face it.
Yes. 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 And that's like everything else right now in humanity. We're really needing to address the parts of ourselves that we are ignoring, that we are denying, that we don't want to look at, and I think to your point earlier, you're talking about men and doing this work with them in the Alchemy of Men. I mean, it's so important. It's so important that we look at those things that are, I always say, you got to look under the bed to know the monsters that you're dealing with. Otherwise, you don't know if you're properly equipped to deal with them. And this human consciousness that's evolving, it's the reason that we want to be in this time in space, because we are on the precipice of a massive conscious awakening. And it started for sure, when I began my journey, 15 years ago, it was fringe, but now it's very trendy. And the only way forward is to keep looking. And it's hard. It is agonizing, but the crime of not looking means that it does persist. It does get worse, because the more people don't look, the more the universe will send these awful ripples, these ugly waves of nasty humanity for us to really, truly understand this doesn't work.
Yeah. In a microcosm of this, we all experience this every day too. So I was out this weekend with my wife and both of us were kind of not in the best mood, and it had nothing to do with each other, but we were both just like in our shit, right? We were just like in our messes, and luckily we weren't putting it on each other. We were just with each other in our messes. And I was saying something about like, sometimes I just like wish I was like one of these men that I know who are just like working or neutral. There's no highs, there's no lows. They're never like angry. They're never sad. They're never that happy. They're kind of like flatlining. And I actually used to be very much like a flatline. And I was sharing with her, it was like, it's like I learned how to like feel. And now I have to have my heart broken and I have to feel. And now when something's wrong, I have to like express it and share it. And I created this very intentional relationship. And so when something's with her, she gets to bring it to me and I have to be with it. And it's not even have to, I get to, right? Because I created it this way. I wanted this.
Yeah.
And as you were saying that, I was thinking about how we do this in our lives, where most relationships today, the people would rather not talk about what's their problems or what's not working. We'd rather just like have fun, eat good food, drink, be on our phones, watch our Netflix and distract. And then there's a massive eruption, right? Because we're ignoring
the elephant.
The elephant in the room, right? And this is happening in our jobs. It's happening with our health. It's
with
happening
our parents,
our relationship, right? Yep. And so it feels better a lot of the time because we're just avoiding. But then when it explodes, the consequences are so bad, right? It explodes as finding out you have cancer because you haven't taken care of yourself. It explodes as, your company imploding or people leaving or getting fired or it implodes as a divorce. And now you have kids and you have to deal with that, right? So many different, it implodes as resorting to alcohol and drugs and whatnot.
Yeah.
Versus if we looked at it a little bit every day, right? Like when I think about this relationship I'm in, and yeah, sometimes we have to have tough conversations, but they're calm. Nobody's yelling. Nobody's throwing things. There's
safety.
There's no dramatics in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And
it's like, yeah, okay, we have to do that a little more often, but it's not like a tidal wave, right? And I think that microcosm is like, if we all were willing to do it a little more often, it actually, you have to be with it more often, which is tougher, but it's easier to be with it because it's not so dramatic.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think it's so crucial, and that witnessing of it is best done through your own private meditation practice. So if you're not meditating yet, get doing that, because it does help you to navigate through those moments where you're like feeling the storms, but you're at least safe in your own boat, and I love that, you're not only learning this for yourself, but teaching others. It's so, 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 so important. And I just think that as we continue to grow as a species, the best thing that we can do is have more men like you who are willing to say, hey, I was an asshole once, but I just really didn't want to be. So I'm in recovery. And, to teach other people how to be in recovery. I think that work is more important than things like AA or things of that nature. I think ultimately we have lots of addictive things in our society that need to be given up. And I think that we need to evolve past them. I don't know what that would look like yet, but I do know that alcohol is terribly abused. I think marijuana is terribly abused. I think that, Netflix and pornography are terribly abused. And I think that the ways that we have created recovery for some of those things is abstinence. And I don't believe that abstinence is the only way forward. And actually, my friend Amanda, who was on this podcast a few weeks ago, talked about this. She talks a lot. She works in the marijuana world. And she talks a lot about, how we need to just be able to sort of have things in small doses and experience little bits, just small exposures. Because it can't be all or nothing, because if we go for nothing, then the deprivation makes us want it, or it makes us behave in such a way that we become zealots about it. And that's not great either.
Yeah. There's something, one thing you said before, I'm going to go back to, and then I want to say this.
Yeah.
When you said, we all should be meditating. We hear this at the retreat. I hear this from people all the time. Like, I can't meditate. Right? And I say this at every retreat.
Yeah.
You can't sit with yourself for 10 minutes. How do you expect anyone else to sit with you?
Yes.
Right? It's like, it doesn't matter what's happening. Just sit and be quiet. And like, you can, there's no right. Sometimes I play music. Sometimes it's silent. Sometimes I burn Palo Santo. Sometimes I do nothing. Sometimes I use Hape. I feel like you would know, sometimes I don't. Like, there's no right way, but ultimately every day there's some moment of time where it's just me with myself.
Yeah.
And look, you can do it outside. Sometimes I go outside and I just lay on the grass for 20 minutes. I cold plunge. So I have like a few minutes in the cold plunge, like where there's nothing, I'm not on my phone. I'm just sitting there being with myself. But we think about how hard how much trouble we have being with each other in so many different facets. If we can't be with ourselves, we'll never be able to powerfully be with anyone else.
Oh, brother, I'm 100% there with you. This has been unbelievable and so much fun. You are fantastic, and I'm very grateful. Is there any other nuggets that you want to share with people before we kind of wrap things up a little?
Just the thing that you said, the last piece you said about the addiction, a lot of the people that I work with will have something, right? Whether it be alcohol, Netflix, porn. Yeah. People often don't even realize we're all addicted to our phones, right? Like, I think we're addicted to feeling certain ways. We're addicted to our frustration. We're addicted to feeling like I was like the other day, I was like, oh, I'm addicted to not feeling good in my body. Like to just feeling no matter how good a shape I'm in or not good a shape, I still don't feel good in my body. I'm actually comfortable in that. I felt like that for so long that, right, trying to not be that would actually be uncomfortable to actually.
Yeah, it's the plate you go to on the buffet.
Yeah, and until it gets a certain point where it's bad enough, I would have to actually use most effort to change it versus being forced to change it.
Yeah.
But I love what you said, because I'm not, there's a lot of like men's work people out there that are like, never watch porn and never do drugs. And I'm just like, dude, there's been porn since the beginning of time. There was naked women on caves and drugs and things since the beginning of time. I refuse to believe that like things are just inherently bad. It's like they're tools and how we use them. There's many couples that use porn to create intimacy. And there's many people that use plant medicines to like connect more with spirit. And there's people that use drugs to have fun together.
Yep.
Now, again, we can abuse all these things. I think one of my biggest lessons that I think is helpful is look at what your shadowy side craves. Mm-hmm. And then can you give your shadow the space to go play, but with enough leash that it's not in control? So there's times where like, I'm like, I want to go to a bar and like drink and be kind of like flirty and like as if me and my wife talk about this all the time, like to go our separate ways, but like, and have enough rope that we don't do anything that crosses any lines or boundaries, but we get some of that energy out. Mm-hmm. That even sometimes I think, you know, I spent the weekend hanging out with my brother, like the end of last week into the beginning of the weekend. And I noticed with my brother, I was playing childlike and kind of adolescence like, and our jokes were really inappropriate and kind of very like immature boys. My brother's 39, I'm 42, right? And this feeling of it wasn't public, it wasn't affecting anyone else. And that energy is like needs to come out. And if it doesn't come out in a responsible way, it's gonna come out sideways.
Yes.
And so how do we figure out what our shadow needs? Mine is a little bit of an asshole. So I need to like let that version of me play somewhere. Because if I just lock it in a closet, it's going to kick down the door and come out at the worst time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so important. And I love the idea of you and your brother just being safe spaces for one another to be that. I think that is so special and sacred. I have 4 brothers, and the way that they are with one another, I love to watch it. I love to witness it. I always am on the outside, but very much on the inside. And I think you're right. You know, if you don't have a place to be the self that is not necessarily everybody's cup of tea, but you know your brother can sort of roll with those punches, that's kind of like the best way to be, the best person to be that with, because you know that you won't push beyond his boundaries. And if he does, then hopefully the relationship is safe enough that he can say like, okay, but that was you being an asshole.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I sometimes with my wife will be driving somewhere, and this happened a lot when I was meeting a lot of her friends at the beginning. And I, on the way there, would say, I would just kind of like dump. Things would just come out, and she would be like, and at the beginning of our relationship, she would get really nervous. What is he going to say when he's around people? And I had to have her see that my obnoxiousness in the car on the way there was like I was like shaking all that off. So when I got there, I got to actually be the man that I wanted to be with people, because there was this adolescent side of me that makes inappropriate jokes, that doesn't care who's there. And it's like, hey, that served when I was an asshole, but the man I want to be in the world, that's not okay. Like there's ripples and impacts that I'm not okay with that. So how do I like kind of just like shake that energy off? Right. And now it's funny because she's like, you're getting it all out. Right. And I'm like, yeah,
I'm almost done. We're 6 minutes away. I have 4 more minutes of shaking. Love, that's fantastic. Alex, this has been so much fun. Please tell everybody how they can support you in your business and where they can find you.
Yeah. Alchemy of Men, alchemyofmenretreat.com. You can find out everything about the retreat. You can reach out to us. You can see videos of 30 men who have gone on the retreat and sharing their experience. AlexTerranovaCoaching.com. Instagram, Inspirational Alex. But if you reach out, we have the retreats, we have men's groups, we have fire circles. I do one-on-one coaching typically for executives, leaders, men. And we usually work with men, but I do have female clients also. Yeah. And if you're interested in, a lot of people have been reaching out to me just to be curious about these plant medicine journeys. Right. I didn't go move to the jungle and get rid of all my things. So I'm happy to share and connect with people and to share my experience if they're interested or curious.
Amazing. Amazing. This
Thanks
has
for
been so
having me.
fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me. This has been such a beautiful episode. I'm so grateful. We will be back in another couple of weeks with another episode, but thank you all for tuning in and take very good care of yourselves. Thanks for listening to another episode of I'm Really Into That Stuff. You can follow along with us on Instagram at I'm Really Into That Stuff or on Twitter at That Stuff Pod. And be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast. If this episode resonated with you and something that you're really into, share it with someone you love. Sending you strength, peace, love, and light until our next episode.